Dialing in 2025, Part 1, The Muscle. Alright folks, it's day 993, which means we're 1 week out from 1,000 days unbroken training. A personal record of mine, something I'm proud of. But also, we're within a week out of 2025, which means setting new goals, self-improvement, onwards and upwards, health, wealth, and happiness. So, with that in mind, I'm going to start a new series going over some of the ways we can maximize our 2025, starting with, the muscle. What are the main things that we should focus on in order to, dare I say, optimize, that word you guys like, our muscle gains for 2025? All right, let's get started. Without getting into recovery, and by recovery, I mean primarily sleep and stress management, we're going to skip that because obviously that's a big lever right there, but that requires its own separate discussion. We're going to talk about the three other biggest levers, which are overall calories, protein requirements, and the training. Now, I put those three levers in that order from least to most important, and here's why. You cannot, despite what some people seem to still think in 2024, force feed gains. Nutrition is permissive of gains. In much the same way people say insulin is anabolic, insulin isn't necessarily an anabolic driver. Insulin, however, is permissive of the anabolic process. In other words, it like fertilizes the ground, but to quote Dr. Eric Helms, the training is the seed. Without the training stimulus, there is no growth. So, for this reason, we put calories at the bottom of the list in terms of least important, because while a caloric surplus is important and it will definitely make the environment more permissible to growth, it's not absolutely a 100% hard requirement if the training stimulus is more robust. That's why we can see, in the case of beginners, significant gains in muscle tissue with very minor surpluses and even some main gaining, quote unquote, gains without a massive caloric surplus. Really, if you want to get granular with it, you can even, I know this is going to drive some of you nuts, so I got to word this carefully, not necessarily gain in a caloric deficit. Okay, I'm not saying we're violating thermodynamics here, but like I've mentioned in previous videos, the process with which to grow muscle is very costly in terms of energy demands. And so when you talk about the energy demands of the training stimulus as well as the energy demands of the anabolic process, you may in total be a little bit under that which you put in. So technically, end output, you're in a slight deficit. However, the result of that output is you gained some lean tissue, if that makes sense. All that to say, of the three, calories matters the least. It matters, but it matters the least. Next, minimal protein requirements. Now, if you're eating enough to be permissive of gains, you're probably meeting your minimum protein requirements. However, just to be clear, while we don't have to get all 90s with it and have like 600-700 grams of protein a day to grow, if we err on the side of caution and stay somewhere between 1.6 at a minimum and 2.4 grams per kilogram, so right around a gram per pound, give or take, then we should have more than enough protein to be permissive of our gains. Add on some calories to that, and with the proper training stimulus and of course recovery, we should be on our road to maximizing our gains for 2025. One last caveat with protein is that the literature suggests that more than 3.2 grams per kilogram isn't really going to do anything extra to promote gains, because again, you can't force feed growth, and even with protein, there's only so much you can use per unit time. So anything above that 3.2 grams per kilogram amount is just going to be additional calories, which, since protein is 4 kilocalories per gram, the same as carbohydrates, but carbohydrates in the presence of enough protein are more permissive to growth because they can provide additional energy to the systems that are doing the growth in the first place. You're probably better off having your extra calories come from carbs or carbs and fat than just going ham on the protein and having some absurdly high amount like 700 grams per day that even with anabolics you're not going to be able to make use of. Alright, so now that we've talked about calories and protein, let's get to the training. Let's get to the most important part. Let's plant the seed. When we talk about training, what are the 3 most important things to consider when generating a robust training stimulus? There's 3 big training variables that we can manipulate in order to generate a robust stimulus, and that is intensity, or how heavy or hard the load is to move. That can also be speed of the movement, so like bar speed, dumbbell speed, etc., but we'll kind of sidebar that later. Then total volume, so the amount that we move that particular load. And then, of course, frequency. So iteratively, the number of times we perform that load at those volumes. So we got intensity, volume, frequency. Of the 3, as much as I'm a big advocate of volume, the intensity is arguably the most important because there is a certain minimum threshold under which no amount of volume or frequency will be stimulative. What do I mean by that? If I get a pencil and I curl it 1,000 times, it's not going to make my bicep any bigger because the pencil is too light to provide any kind of stimulative resistance in any amounts of volume or frequency. Conversely, if I did a 1 rep max of any given lift, even though it is only 1 repetition, I'd be willing to bet a very large amount of money that with the right equipment, we could still see some measurable amount of muscle growth from that single repetition because the intensity coefficient was so high. Next is volume. We know from the literature as well as anecdote that anything from 5 to 30 repetitions seems to be the quote-unquote sweet spot for hypertrophy, and that if you want to index more towards strength or speed, you can use higher frequencies of lower repetitions, so singles, doubles, triples, 4s, 5s, and 6s. And if you want to index more towards muscular endurance, you can do more sets of the higher volumes like 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, etc. Now, because biology is action over time, we can't just talk about how effective one single workout is, and that's where frequency comes into play. Iteratively, how many times in a week, in a month, in a training cycle, which may be 3 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 16 weeks, how many times iteratively are we doing these intensities at these volumes? So we have to ask the question, what is our goal? And what that goal is going to determine the answer to how we conduct those 3 things, our intensity, our volume, and our frequency. I'll answer the frequency one first, which is as often as you can recover from. Frequency of the 3 is the least argued about because honestly, like if you can make time to train, just train as often as you can, as long as it doesn't negatively impact other areas of your life because you're too smoked to work or be present for your family or whatever the case may be. Intensity and volume, however, are simply answered by the question of sport specificity. If you want to be stronger, then lift heavier with lower volumes. You want to be bigger and bubblier, lift moderately heavy to light with moderate to high volumes. And I know that's a very general hand-wavy answer, but this is meant to be a quick overview, and we're going to go into each of these topics specifically in future videos moving forward on this channel. So with all that said, in summary, for 2025, the new year, to maximize your muscle gain goals, assuming you have your sleep and stress management in order, my recommendation to you is focus on the following from least to most important: total overall calories, making sure you meet your minimum protein requirements, and then focus the most on making sure that your training is correct for your needs with the right combination of volume, frequency, and intensity. Like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and thanks for watching.